It has been said that average people want you to stay average. Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast, the podcast designed to challenge you to break the mold that average has on the world. Each episode offers insights directly from those who choose to break average every day. Now, for the latest insights, here are your hosts, Paul Gustafson and Rick Morris.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Breaking Average podcast. I'm your host, Rick Morris, and as always, my buddy Paul Gustafson's here. How you doing, Paul?
Rick, great to be here with you today. I'm so excited. I can't wait to get into the book that we're going to talk about today. And it's been so much fun over the last few weeks just to kind of go through these books and books to lead. These have been powerful, haven't they?
They really have, and it's been interesting to go back through them again, as we've talked about many times. Is the first time you read something, I mean, most of these books will hit you where you are. Yeah. So to go back and kind of remember that, hey, I like this book for this reason, and to find something else in it now, right? Because we've obviously grown since the last time we read these books. Yeah. It's been really fascinating to see it. Not only that, but you'll read a book and you'll go, wow, this is really good. But sometimes you don't know how far ahead of time it is either, right? Meaning we just, when we went through the Simon Sinek book again, it was so well done that it's timely still today. Like he almost knew some of this stuff was going to happen around the pandemic and everything else. I mean, it's just really interesting to me.
Yeah, great point. These books are timeless, right? So when an author like Simon Sinek, like you just mentioned, or the book that we're going to talk about here today in just a minute, when they write a book like this, if they're speaking truth, if they're hitting some key points in terms of behavior, human behavior, impact, influence, it's going to stand the test of time. And we're going to have more observations than we did when we first read that book, because we've got a whole history of new information that we've gathered over the last few years to show the evidence and the proof of what he's talking about or she's talking about, depending upon who the author is. So,
yeah, for sure. So let's get into today's book as we continue this series of books to lead. This is one that you picked. Tell us what the book is and why you picked it.
Yeah, this one was a pretty easy pick for me. I love this author. His name is Daniel Pink. And he's up here in Washington, D.C. I've had a chance to see him a few times, actually talked to him a few times. So he's just a great guy. But these books that he puts out every 4 or 5 years are phenomenal. Talk about speaking truth and seeing that truth come alive again, even, in this case, 9 years since he wrote it. We're talking about To Sell Is Human. That's the book that he wrote that we're going to be highlighting today. And it's about the surprising truth about moving others. I love this book. It was a groundbreaking book for me when I first read it. I was going through that process of like, I don't really want to be in sales, but yes, we have to influence and maybe we are. I went through that questioning of like, okay, how do we actually persuade and influence other people? What are some thoughts to that? And this book really kind of set me on a new path, and I needed it. But how about you? I mean, you love this book too, don't you?
Oh, this book was very validating to me. One of my statements from stage all the time is that the number one skill a project manager needs to develop is influence. And I have several jokes around that, in the sense that I was told I own the project, but those aren't my people. It's not my money. It wasn't even my idea, right? So what do I have other than influence in order to compel and help move people to accomplish this task? And it, early on when I started to get into disc and disc profiles, I realized I had a little bit of a different personality type than most project managers. Again, if you just look at the general whole, about probably 80% of project managers fall in either to the D or C categories, right? It's very task oriented, right? It's a very task oriented kind of job, detail oriented job. You got to move things along. And I'm a high I, which is generally a salesperson, right? High I's are influencers and salespeople. And I started to wonder why I was getting success. And I think it was because of the sales side of it, is that my job isn't really to compel people to do something by an impossible date. My job is to influence the date and make sure it's a timely date to where these people can actually complete something that is possible. And so everything about my career is about influencing others to see different perspective so that we can make the best decision. And so I started to study influence and look at influence and all these different things. And this book and the book we're going to discuss next week were huge for me in validating that I was on the right track and understanding who I was in the marketplace.
Yeah, there's a lot of revelations for me as well. You know, it validates some things, but it also reveals some things that perhaps we didn't know, right? So the moments of insight in this book, I think, are rich. Um, you know, the book kind of starts for me. I remember reading through it and I was like, oh, because I was trying to mastermind this book with other people. And I wasn't sure it was going to really connect with everybody initially, just because Dan Pink, I love his approach to it, and he really sets the table. And sometimes I want the table set right away, and I want to get to the meal,
Yeah.
right? I want to get to the meal. So he does, and he takes just, I think, the proper time. Now that once you go through the book, you realize, oh, okay, I see why he set the table the way he did. So the momentum kind of gets rolling for me. About chapter 3, 4, 5 and beyond, right? But I love those first few chapters. I'm not saying anything negative about it, but once you get past those first few, then you've got something here. You know, you've got a Thanksgiving feast. And so that was the experience I had with this book, and actually other Dan Pink books too. He's a table setter, and then he gives you a feast after that. So it's a really kind of, I like his approach. It helps me actually as an author and a writer. I'm like, okay, I need to make sure I set the table properly. So if you want to look at a writing style, Dan Pink's style is pretty good. The other thing that he did too, and I remember talking to him, his intro, the preface, and he says, you know, I did that after, right? I write the book, and then I go back, and then I summarize essentially what they're about to read. And if you just want to read, and it's really good, by the way. So if you just read the intro, the very front part, you get the whole gist of where he's going with it without him giving away all the answers. It's not a Cliff Notes version, but it's enough of a sense in terms of the power of that book that'll give you something as a refresher that you can pick up anytime and go back and go like, oh yeah. And we're going to talk about some of those oh yeahs here. So you want to jump in? What were the big takeaways? I mean, there's a lot in this book. So where do you want to start, Rick?
Well, I mean, chapter 1, right? We're all in sales now, but I like how he calls out that, you know, the existing data shows essentially that 1 out of every 9 people actually has a job in sales, but the 8 out of the other 9 are non-selling salespeople, or non-sales selling. Essentially, they're selling a position. But I also like how he tied in the fact that the older you are and the more experience you have, then the more time you're going to be spent moving others, which means you're more time in sales. Like it becomes like an exponential growth. I thought that was a pretty cool call out as well, right?
Yeah, Rick, it's a great point. You know, we think that maybe we're not in sales, but the truth of it is that we're all in sales. You know, he talks about the fact that, hey, look, in these other roles that we don't think are sales, the 8 other ones, well, we probably are, especially in this 21st century. We're trying to influence people to make decisions. And when you try to influence people to make decisions, you're really selling. It's non-sales sales. And I love that idea. And he again, really practical advice. So he's not just sharing the observations that he's seen, but he's also giving you some practical help in terms of making that impact and making that influence, which I really like. So yeah, that was the first big takeaway, is that, hey, look, we're all in sales now. We're all in sales. It's to sell is human. That's the name of the book. So.
Well, and just to kind of speed up these first couple of chapters to get into the meat as well, then he further emphasizes that point. I think this is where you're talking about really setting the table, because right, chapter 1, he gives you that, you know, hey, we're all in sales, but then basically says that non-sales selling requires influencing, persuading, and changing behavior while balancing what others want and what you can provide them. And that's what he means is whether we're trying to get somebody to complete a task on time, or whether we're trying to get them to understand why they need to take this medicine, or we need to try that's all influence and persuading, which is selling. And back to, you know, a quote that I tell my kids all the time, that Every interaction is a transaction and somebody's buying. And that's what I mean by that. They're either buying where you want them to move, buying the product, whatever that may be. He really lays that down, but there's something here too. And I don't know if I'm stealing your thunder here, but I really love the difference in definition between irritation and agitation, right? So he talks about irritation is challenging people to do something you want to do.
Yeah.
Agitation is challenging them to do something they want to do.
Yeah.
And that made me pause reading it through a second time going, that's really interesting. I didn't really pick up on that the first time through.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm glad you brought that one up. I like that. Because I went through and there was a bunch that I re-highlighted. I'm like, ooh, that's really good. And that was one of those that hit me. So Rick's point, spot on, guys. Here's the other thing, Rick. I love that quiz. He's got this little quiz, and this is something that all our listeners, all our viewers can do too. This is the sales quiz. So here it is. 4 questions. And it's just, these are yes or no. And Rick, I'll ask you. We'll just have fun. I'm going to ask you, Rick. So first question, do you earn your living trying to convince others to purchase goods or services?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Number 2, do you work for yourself or run your own operation, even on the side?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. Number 3, does your work require elastic skills, the ability to cross boundaries and functions, to work outside your specialty and to do a variety of different things throughout the day?
Yes.
Okay. And number 4, do you work in education or healthcare?
Yes. I mean, education.
Yeah, education. And now, Orange Theory Fitness,
Sure.
kind of healthcare,
That's true.
right?
That's true.
So here's the thing. He says, look, if you answer yes to just one of those questions, just one of those 4 questions, you're in sales. You're in sales. So if you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, think about it. You are in sales. So what we're going to unpack over the next 20 minutes or so, however long our podcast is, again, we're not going to be able to divulge all the great info in this book, guys. We just can't. And we encourage you to go grab this book, To Sell as Human by Daniel Pink, and digest it. But we're going to give you some stuff. We're going to give you some elements here that I think are great takeaways. And I'm looking forward to that. So you ready to dive into some of the practical things he talks about?
If we get into chapter 3, this is the one that kind of got me too. So I just answered yes to all 4 of those questions. I've clearly said that I have a position in sales, but we're in such an over commercialized society that there's a negative connotation to sales and selling. Yeah. And that's because we are inundated with so many different things of people trying to move us in for unpure causes. Like as a matter of fact, I was just looking at my email this morning, right before I got on this podcast. I had 31 messages in my mailbox this morning saying that an uncle had died or they had found money or like all of those scams. But I had 31 of those come through this morning into my junk mail. And It just fascinates me. And all of them are trying to sell me on a position that there's something out there better for me. And all I have to do is these little things and I'm going to have the financial windfall of, right? Even these, these fake email scams are trying to sell you on something. Right. So that caveat emptor to caveat venditor that he talks about, but when he starts talking about this whole piece, there's that icky feeling like, oh, sales is icky, when it really isn't. It's just that we have so many negative examples that we rely on that's what's going on.
Yeah, I like that. Chapter 3 is powerful. Those two, the contrast there between caveat emptor and caveat venditor. And, I remember reading this in 2012 when the book first came out, and I knew about buyer beware. I mean, who hasn't heard that phrase, right,
Sure.
Rick? The principle that the buyer alone is responsible for dealing and checking the quality on whatever goods or services are buying, right? It's on us, the buyer, to check it. I remember the house contract and it was all on me. It wasn't the builder. It was on the house that I was about to have built. And I didn't like that contract. And I went to the lawyer and he says, Paul, caveat emptor, man, buyer beware. I'm like, what are you talking about? Mr. Easterling, what are you talking about? Because this contract right here doesn't put any onus on the builder. you can't go with this contract. And so he modified it, and the deal got pulled, man. I was working with the builder, and he said, yeah, no problem. Put in your changes and tweaks and initialize all that. Did all that work. Spent lots of money with a lawyer just to fix a simple contract to build a house. And then the builder pulled back. Why? Because we flipped the script on him from buyer beware to seller, or in this case, builder beware, which is caveat venditor. And, there's a long story behind that, but it turned out, to be a blessing. And we ended up getting that house, but in the terms that we needed from a caveat venditor standpoint. So it all worked out eventually. And the caveat venditor is let the seller beware, let the builder beware, whoever is providing that good or service beware. And the realization is that we're in this 21st century where knowledge is power, right? Having that awareness that as consumers, we have more information and knowledge about the product or good or service that we're buying than sometimes the seller, the sales guy is offering. So we go in fully educated. And that's power for us. And knowing that caveat venditor, let the seller beware, that creates an opportunity for us in the positions that we have to move people, realizing that people are coming in educated, And there was an old phrase from a furniture company north of me that says, educated consumers are best customer. Well, if we have that mind, and they were fantastic. And if we have that same mindset and educated consumers are best customer, we're going to be able to have an impact and influence people in a strong way. Think of our audience right here, those you listening or watching. We know that you're fully educated and influenced in leadership. We know that you understand it. And we're not trying to tell you something that we don't know. We're trying to tell you something that you do know and just elevate it in terms of having an understanding and the observations of how it works and the impact that it can make. So I love that chapter. We could spend the whole podcast talking about this.
Gone are the days. You remember, like, you used to go into like Best Buy, and that's where you would find out like about the latest stuff. Now with Amazon and reviews and other stuff that's popping up, like people are becoming more and more educated than ever. And they also can call out, the people that are basically telling mistruths. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, that's not what I heard, or that kind of stuff. But we used to trust the salespeople on the floor because at that point they were more knowledgeable than us. And that script has been flipped, like crazy. Almost everybody's more educated or knows about the product that they're buying now at this point.
And that opens the door, man, from an empathy standpoint, right? So if somebody comes in and they already have a little bit of an understanding of what's there, that creates a much better connection for us as leaders and influencers to move them, because now we've got some common ground. We can just hit that. So, but yeah, you're going to say something.
Well, no, I was just going to kind of move on to, he gets into this next part though, of like how to be, right? Yes. And the first one I thought was just brilliant, which was attunement. Yeah. So talk about attunement for a moment, Paul.
Yeah, I love this, right? So the old school of selling is always be closing. So Dan Pink says, no, not anymore. The new ABCs of selling is attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. And attunement, that's a powerful one, right? So yeah, let's get into attunement. This is that element of he calls it bringing oneness into harmony with individuals, groups, and contexts, right? Having that common ground. John Maxwell talks about it, common ground. This is so powerful. You and I, when we have conversation, even on our Sunday morning podcast, when we do these, we record these Sunday morning, we spend some time, Rick and I, just attuning with one another. It's attunement.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get a chance to taste that as a viewer or listener, but oftentimes we haven't hit the record yet. We make sure that we are attuned together before we dive in. And then when we do dive in, we get into the buoyancy. We'll talk about all that. And we try to provide clarity. Yeah, those three things are in play all the time. And that's what I love about this. He's hit the nail on the head. He's presented something here that perhaps other people haven't realized, but they know is truth. It's always about attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. But yeah, let's keep going on attunement, because this is a really good one.
Yeah, because he talks about perspective taking versus empathy. And this one took me a second, right? Because we all know empathy is a great emotion, right? And to be empathetic and to understand empathy. But he says perspective taking is a cognitive capacity, mostly about thinking, where empathy is an emotional response, mostly about feeling. He said, so perspective taking is better than empathy in this case because you can submerge your own interests, meaning that you can, while you're thinking, you can make sure that you're pushing down what it is that you want and attune to what it is that they want,
Right.
so that you have their perspective versus just feeling this is something that they need. I thought that was a really, really technical answer, but a really good one.
Yeah, and I would say to that, because he's not discounting empathy at all, guys. In fact, he has a fun little exercise to see if you are empathetic or not. You know, the E on the forehead concept. Yep. I love that. But empathy, the way that I understood it, Rick, and banter back if you see it differently, empathy is powerful. It's sort of that setup, but it's not enough in itself, right? So get into that perspective taking, and you know, tuning yourself with others hinges on these three principles. He talks about increase your power by reducing it. So we got to reduce our power. We need to use our head as much as our heart, right? He's not saying don't use your heart. You know, leaders lead with the heart before they ask for a hand. Yes, that's John Maxwell. It's truth, but you still got to use your head. There's opportunities there for you to attune with somebody. And then this idea of mimic strategically, right? So the mimic concept, which I've heard before, and that's just the ability for us to kind of balance ourselves with what, that's powerful in itself. And boy, we could spend a lot of time on that. But those are three elements that he talks about with attunement. So anything you want to jump out that you want to pull out on that?
Yeah, just when he says when he does the extrovert, introvert, and ambivert, right? So extroverts can talk too much and listen too little, and fail between asserting and holding back. He said introverts can be too shy to initiate and sometimes too timid to close, but ambiverts are the best movers because they're the most skilled attuners, knowing when to speak up and when not to, essentially.
Yeah, it is. What's cool is that he calls out Adam Grant in this book and that chapter.
Yep.
And this is the first time that the world gets introduced to Adam Grant. So Adam Grant was introduced through this book.
Nice.
And yeah. And of course, Adam Grant does a book himself called Give and Take, which is reflected. That was the research that Adam was doing that was being published and that Daniel Pink used in his book, talking about that and getting into the part that you just talked about, ambiverts. So it's such a powerful thing. We're all, whether we're an introvert or an extrovert, the power is actually in sailing and moving people is with the ambivert. And the ambivert is somebody who can adapt accordingly, right? You know, increasing our power by reducing it, that kind of concept, and getting into that position of being flexible, agile. And, you know, and that gets into the next bit, right? It kind of sets the stage for buoyancy.
It does. It does. I did want to have one call out though. In one of the sample cases they talk about is, you know, one of the things you've talked about here on the podcast, and Jeff Bezos and the empty chair concept, and being attuned to that's our customer has a seat at our table. I thought that was really cool. But yeah, getting into buoyancy, how to stay afloat in the ocean of rejection, right? Is the second essential quality of moving others.
It is, you know. Guess what, guys? Life comes fast, life comes hard. There are always challenges. There are things that happen. Our life gets disrupted. Never can we script the day and expect it to work exactly the way that we think it's going to work from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed. We know that something's going to happen, you know. And this whole chapter on buoyancy, he could write a whole book on it, I think. Yeah. Right. And maybe he's got a new book coming out next year, so maybe he's going to hit more of this. But this ability for us to be buoyant is so powerful. And he talks about the 3 stages of it. Like, what can we do ahead of time? Like if you're speaking somewhere, and Rick, you've done this plenty of times, right? And you know, pretty much maybe you've gone through your, you know, pre-thinking in terms of what the audience needs, what they want to hear and all that. But let's say you're about to take stage, and you know there's 10,000 people out there, 10,000 people. And just before you take the stage, the prior speaker did something, or something happened in the environment where it changed the whole room. And you know that all of a sudden they're putting food in front of everybody. Like, Rick, you're up next, but we're eating lunch. We're tight on time. We don't have enough time. So first you got to shave down your 40-minute talk into 20, and you got to do it over lunch. What is Rick Morris going to do in that position?
First thing I'm gonna do is make a joke about it. But and it's real though. That has happened to me more times in my career than I can even imagine. So it's interesting, but you've got to rise above and you've got to call it out too and go with that flow. But one of the things though that's unfortunate that is I don't do a lot of pre-thinking. Like I have like three points I want to deliver, but I don't know how necessarily I'm going to deliver them when I hit the stage till I read the room. And I think that was something that was big for me is that I attuned to what was happening. But it's what I do in that scenario though is I empathize with the fact too that they're feeling maybe a little rude, that they have to, like, they got to eat, but then they want to hear me, like that kind of stuff. So I just I try to put myself in the situation on their side and what they would need from me from stage. So I go super energy with that. I'll go super high energy, bounce around the room a lot, really project my voice, and have fun with it and just ignore all the clinking of the dishes and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Yeah. I remember being in a position where I was walking in thinking, okay, what they want is a PowerPoint. What they expect maybe is a PowerPoint. And they just got 90 minutes of PowerPoint and the room was dead.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, you know what? I've got the PowerPoint, but it's not about the PowerPoint. It's about them.
Yeah.
So I pretty much walked the room and engaged with them and actually went to some of the tables. These were all, 8 people around a table kind of situation. And I used that space and that time to really connect with people. I had the mic. I had a chance to really connect with them, ask some questions. I flipped it from just telling them what to do and then asking them. And, I'm not sure how it translated from a speaking standpoint, because I think what they wanted ultimately was a replayable speech. But this was a dialogue. They needed it. The room needed it. They had enough speeches at that point. So It was just trying to be buoyant. And I love this idea. So
what I love is when he starts talking, a couple of key points in this chapter, negative emotions narrow our vision and help us survive in the moment, right? So the fight or flight.
Yeah.
Positive emotions broaden our ideas about actions and opening us up to a wider range of thoughts, making us more receptive and creative. And a lot of people think, oh, then I'm just going to go super positive because of that. But I love when he says negative emotions offer us feedback on our performance, information on what's not working, and hints how to do better. Unchecked levity makes you flighty, ungrounded, and unreal, while unchecked gravity leaves you in a heap of misery. I just that I thought was beautiful.
It is, man. There's some quotable, tweetable stuff out of this book. I love to talk about interrogative self-talk. Did you like that bit?
Yeah.
Again, we're on buoyancy, and he's, again, let's say that Rick's taking the stage and maybe he hasn't done it a lot. All right. Or whoever. All right. And maybe you're in that position, like, well, gosh, I got to speak at this group and I'm not a big speaker. Well, practice interrogative self-talk. All right. And this isn't just doing an affirmation, and those are good. Nothing wrong with it, but it's actually using the power of questions to really move. Right. So like affirmation is making a statement, and the idea of interrogative, gosh, I can't speak today. Interrogative self-talk is asking these questions. I love the one where you've seen the movie Miracle, right?
Oh yeah.
1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team, and the coach is in the locker room right before the game, and there's no chance. They shouldn't be there, right? On paper, they were not the best team, but they played like they were a team, and that's why they were there. And the coach believed in them 100%. And then he asked them a question, essentially: who says that you can't? Who says that you can't? Who says that you shouldn't be able to win this game, essentially? And that interrogative self-talk really set the table for them to win that game against Finland, right? So actually, I think they played Russia and then Finland and win the gold medal. Yeah. But just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Who says that you can't? Ask that question.
And then what that does is it helps you lead to clarity. right? Out of that. So if you, like you said, it was attunement, buoyancy, and now clarity. But clarity is the capacity to help others see problems in fresh and revealing ways, right? And to identify problems that maybe they didn't realize they had.
Yeah.
And this leads into what I loved about this is this led into something called the Sandler sales method for me. And I really enjoyed it because it flipped the script of a normal sales process. So normal sales process, especially in technology or software, you basically call, ask them if they're interested in something. You say, sure. Then you're going to go do a demo, right? And that's the first thing. You put all this time into the demo, and then you kind of get into price. And then you find out that the person you're talking to doesn't have any signature authority, and you just blew, 4 months of a sales process. And for me, I was selling software at the time. And what Sandler does is it actually turns it into this clarity exercise up front. So they talk about spilling your candy in the lobby, which is the thing that always stuck with me, is that most salespeople just come in and they're like, here's all the things I can do for you. Right. And they just go through it, and people are like, oh, that's interesting. And they're avoiding the no as much as possible. Right. They just want yes. Where Sandler goes, they talk about pain grenades. And it's a way to answer or to ask questions to help get clarity. But this is to the point of help identify problems they didn't realize they had. So for instance, somebody would say like, oh, I've got a resource management solution. Okay, right. Do you know where you read? So what I do in Sandler sales methods goes, it may not be the case here. So first of all, I'm already saying that if it's a no, it's okay. It's like, oh, that's great. So it may not be the case here, but a lot of my clients get frustrated because they're told everyone's so busy, but we don't know what they're working on. Is that something that you experience? And in asking that, it gives them that chance to identify maybe a problem they didn't have.
Yeah, and great point, guys. Don't miss what Rick's talking about here. This isn't about just solving a problem. This is about identifying a problem, right? So to really create that clarity, get clear on that there is a problem, and make sure that they're on board with that. And once there is, then you can get to the point where if you need to move them, then you have that opportunity to do it. But if you're coming in there thinking that you've got the problem to their issues, but you haven't really addressed it. So he makes this: the ability to move others hinges less on problem solving than on problem finding. And I love this concept. Find the right problem to solve. Find the right problem to solve. Make sure you're solving that problem and find it, and make sure you connect with them. Again, ask questions. Go through that process. Rick just shared some great examples of that.
Yeah, if there's no pain, there's no sale. But thinking about it in the context of what we do this podcast, if there's really not any pain, there's no growth. Right. And so even if you're just trying to move somebody in the sense that you want them to do better in a specific task at their job, we have to identify the pain points in which would want to then identify the behavior they want to change. So just instead of saying, you've got to do this report every time on this date, just say, do you know that there's a lot of decisions that get made from this? And if we make the wrong decision because we have the wrong data, would that be a bad, right? And we understand that there's pain behind the reason why we need that change, we're more likely to move the behavior.
Yeah, so good. I love this quote from this chapter. He says, part of being an innovative leader is being able to frame a problem in interesting ways and to see what that problem really is before you jump in to solve it. So that's one for me. I love seeing that. All right. Now we get into the pitch, right? Yeah. So we've got this idea, ABC, attunement, buoyancy, clarity. And then he's got this whole chapter on the pitch. And I remember when we masterminded this book, as much as I loved ABCs, and I did, this chapter took it to another level. The pitch. You want to get into this one?
Absolutely. And a lot of cool things in this, right? It talks about the one-word pitch, reducing down to a single word to elicit action. But I like the question pitch, right? The question pitch asks a question which compels people to respond and is more effective than statements unless the backing. So that it comes right back to Sandler for me. It's like you're asking a question, you're not making a statement. And that goes right back into clarity, right? And all the things that this is your point of how he sets the table, right? Because he set this table through understanding and through attunement and all this stuff. And now when you're getting into the meat of it right here, you're like, oh, all that other stuff makes so much more sense now of why he was bringing that up in that research.
Yeah, it's good. The one word pitch, I love that. Love the process for which you filter that down to one word. The question pitch, what you're just talking about, so powerful. I jot down thoughts as you're sharing it, but that question pitch, if you hit that one right, Simon Sinek, famous TED Talk, the first 6 lines of his speech is the question pitch.
Yep.
He sets that whole speech up with six, I call it the 6-pack, all right? A 6-pack question. They're all essentially the same question, guys. Powerful. Go back and watch that. The rhyming pitch, not something that I do, but I know it works, right? Think
Sure.
about O.J. Simpson, the trial way back
Oh,
when.
of course.
Right? What was
If it
that one
doesn't
about?
fit, you must acquit. Yep.
It's the rhyming pitch that made an impact. The subject line. What did you think of the subject line pitch? Did you go back and look at your emails like, oh, wow, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
and quite frankly, the subject line pitch is what makes more effective marketers than anything.
Yeah.
But because we're getting inundated with so much email marketing now, that it starts to have that negative connotation, back to what we were talking about. Like, we're getting sold so much now that it's hard. I liked my favorite one was the Pixar pitch, though.
Yes, the Pixar pitch.
Yeah. So once upon a time, blank, every day, blank, one day, blank, because of that, blank, until finally this happened. Really, really solid.
Solid. I love this one too. In fact, I've created a poster and we have some fun every now and then. We'll do some group collaboration stuff and we'll say, hey, let's do a pitch. Let's do a Pixar pitch on the concept that you have, and it really is addressing a problem, right? So when you look at the Pixar pitch, what's beautiful about it is it's addressing a problem early on and then giving you a kind of a transformational step in terms of how a new future is birthed. I've got one for you. I created one just before our call. I created a Pixar pitch for you, Rick. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So here it is. Once upon a time, we thought average was good enough. Every day, we just follow the script, go to work, go to school, punch the clock, do what people expect, head home, watch TV, go to bed, wake up, repeat. One day, we realized there's something more to life, that our comfort zone is really a danger zone, that we're meant for more. Because of that, we began to question mediocrity, the status quo. Because of that, we recognize the impact we can make and value we can add when we choose to be courageous. Until finally, we realize that a life fully lived is a life fully pursued. We need to share that with others, all of us, through our podcast, right here with you guys, through our book and blogs, and everywhere we went, that we, each of us, are meant to break average and encourage and help others to break average too. And we invite you to join us on this mission of breaking average so that we can change the world.
That's awesome, dude. That's awesome. Yeah.
I just did 3 minutes. It didn't take long at all.
Yeah. It becomes so relatable. First of all, you're like, oh, that's what I'm doing. Yeah, I'm just rinsing and repeating. And then it gives them, but here's something I want everyone to really, really focus on this as well, because I want you to take this into the next podcast that we have when we start talking about this next book, but it's the word because.
Yeah. And
the word because in there twice actually moves and impels more than you think. And we'll get into that in the next podcast, but I really, really love that.
Yeah.
What I love, and I don't want to jump ahead too fast here though, but also now that you have that, we still have to have the ability of what he talks about in the next chapter too, which is improvise.
We do. We have to improvise. Just the last point on pitch, and let's get into improvise, but I love these 3 questions. The 3 questions, Rick, didn't you like that? The 3 questions we should consider for every pitch.
Absolutely.
So here they are, guys. This is gold. Write it down. If you write nothing else down, write this one down. Number 1, what do you want them to know? All right. So when you're about to give a pitch, what do you want them to know? Number 2, what do you want them to feel? And number 3, what do you want them to do? What do you want them to do? So, I just took a couple minutes to write a Pixar pitch, and I think I hit all 3 of those things. And, it could probably be cleaned up a little bit and improved, but I talk about what I want them to know, what I want them to feel, and what I want them to do. And that's important for us. And when we try to move people. All right. So you ready for improvise?
I am.
All right.
And I think we've talked about this multiple times on the podcast, but I think this is the experience side of sales and dealing with objections is the improvise. You have the pitch, and now that you've done the pitch, now you're going to get the first reaction or objection or whatever, and this is where improvisation really comes into play, right? And basically to move others, and I love that he throws it back to improv, right? But we follow the 3 essential rules of improv. We hear others, we say yes, and we're giving them the affirmative, and then you make your partner look good. And your partner in this process is the person that you're having the sales conversation with.
Yeah. I like that. It's essentially the ABCs, right? Again, the new ABCs: attunement, buoyancy, clarity. So here, say yes. I love the yes and part where so we're having that conversation, and you do this, Rick. I've heard you do this, where I'll say something and you'll agree with me, and then you'll say, and, well, yes, and, right. And it's powerful because one, you've allowed the anchor to happen and the connection to happen of what just took place. That means you've heard me. But then you allow yourself to expand my awareness to something else, right? So maybe it's identifying the problem that I might have that I wasn't aware of. So I just talked about some of the things I'm going through. You hear me, you do the yes and then you tell me something new that I wasn't aware of. And so it's good. And it gets to number 3, right? Is making your partner look good, making that great connection. Improvisational theater is something that I find fascinating, and the fact that he's pulling off that whole concept, I think, is really, really beautiful.
Well, and when he says making your partner look good, what that calls for and enables is the clarity side again. Yeah. And it gives us the capacity to develop solutions that nobody previously imagined. And I go back into one of my favorite projects we ever did. It was very, very, technical, but basically we had to come up with a way to forecast resources based on early protocol information of drugs going to market, of pharmaceuticals going to market. And so you have a bunch of data, and we have to be able to project a staff. And I knew resource management, and there's another guy in the room that really knew that whole process of getting the drug to market. And the two of us were really attuned with each other. We really got along, respected each other. And the solutions that came out of that, which were like 20% my idea and 80% his idea, were just fascinating. And it was still one of my favorite breakthroughs because we were doing something that nobody had really solved in the market yet. And it was so much like we knew it. It was so much fun, but it really was that making the partner looking good. Like every suggestion we just built on and built on and built on, and got this tremendous momentum. And it was really cool to see at the end too. Like I remember just looking at him across the room when we demoed the solution, and we're like, yeah, like that's it. That works.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well said, man. Yeah. So now finally the last chapter of the book is the serve one. So he really kind of lands the plane in a way that I think is powerful for all of us. So let's dive into that, right? So the serve, he says, sales and non-sales selling are ultimately about service, but service isn't just smiling at customers. It's a broader, deeper, more transcendent definition of service. And get this, guys, this is important. Service is about improving others' lives and in turn, improving the world. And he makes these points about making it personal and purposeful. So your thoughts on that?
You just hit it. He said we should be tapping others' innate desire to serve by making it purposeful, not just personal. That's right. And we don't get us into the whole purpose statements on this podcast, because we'll spiral into a whole nother episode. But servant selling asks if the person you're selling to agrees to buy, will his or her life and the state of the world improve? Like by moving this along, will this improve their lives? That is a grounded question.
Yeah, it is. It is so powerful. And I got one of my highlights here is This is what it means to serve, improving another's life and in turn improving the world. That's the lifeblood of service and in the final secret to moving others. So, Rick, man, this has been such a great book, man. Tip and challenge. There's a lot of tips and challenges we can pull out of this one, right?
Yeah. So let's dive in. I'll make mine quick here as we're running out of time today. But the tip is one of the things I think that's really, really valuable. I got another certification last week, Paul. I actually became a certified high performance coach, which is one of Brendan's things. A really, really cool process.
Awesome, man.
But what we talk a lot about that in purpose, but more so sharing your purpose with others, right? That's what makes it the reality. It's like, what really is that clarity of your life? What is the purpose that you're going after, whatever that may be? And I want to dovetail that. So the tip is to identify your purpose. The challenge is to create a Pixar pitch on your purpose so that you can start to move the other people in your life to understand why that's your purpose, and so that they can join you in this journey to make that come true. This is what we're talking about. It's the ultimate non-sales selling, is to be able to share with your spouse or your friends, your loved ones, your family, what it is that really is your drive, and to be able to do so in such a way that they want to climb aboard and be able to help you attain that. How many times have you made a pitch to somebody and you're like, I've shared this one before when I first decided to write. It was like, I want to write a book, and my now ex-wife said, who's going to read that? Like, that stuck with me. You know what I mean? But I also just said, I'm going to write a book. Right. What I didn't say was share the whole vision of what I felt that book was going to do for the company and for sales and for growth and for everything else. So I didn't do a very good job at the pitch either. So the tip is to not only understand your purpose, but the challenge is to write a Pixar pitch with that purpose so that you can share and compel others to get on board with you.
I love it. That's so much fun, guys. We want to hear those pitches too. So find a way to just let us know. We've got our website. Go to breakingaverage.com. We'll have a place for you to submit some of your pitches. We'd love to hear those, love to see those. We will highlight a few of those on our future podcast. So this is so cool. Rick, here's my tip and challenge. I love this idea that Dan kind of lands the plane on in terms of moving from upsell to upserving, right? So that's my tip and challenge. I kind of roll it all together here and I'll unpack it here. So my challenge to everyone is move from upselling to upserving. All right. And as you do that Pixar pitch that Rick just talked about as your challenge, think about how you're going to be serving others, right? The world that you're going to create for which you are serving. You're not trying to upsell. You're trying to upserve. Upserving means doing more for the other person than he expects you to do, right? What they initially thought you were going to do. You've moved it up a level. You brought it up to another level. You've taken extra steps that transform a mundane interaction into a more memorable experience, right? So again, move from upsell to upserve. It's got an advantage of being the right thing to do. It's the right way to move people. It's all about attunement, buoyancy, clarity. We've already talked about that. And here's a couple of questions that you can ask to make sure that you're hitting it right. All right. So if the person you're trying to move or sell or they agree to buy, ask them, is this going to improve his or her life? Will it improve it? Hopefully the answer is yes. It's got to be yes. That's an upserve, right? And the next question is, when your interaction is over, will the world be a better place than when you began? If the answer is yes, perfect. You're not upselling, you're upserving. So be an upserver. That's what my challenge is for everybody, man. Rick, this has been fun.
It's been fantastic. And I really like that point of upserving. It's not selling, but it's serving others, especially if we want them to change the world. Well, Paul, once again, I'm inspired by our mission of Breaking Average here. It's been a phenomenal podcast. I had so much fun. Really hope everybody continues. Remember the word because as we go into the next podcast, because we know you'll be here with us next week on the next episode of Breaking Average.
Thank you for listening to the Breaking Average podcast. If you loved what you heard, please take a moment to subscribe. All opinions and comments expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or views of any of the advertisers, producers, or platforms. This show was produced by R Squared Multimedia. A special thank you to Milestone Melodies for our theme music. As you continue your day, what is one action that you can apply from this podcast to your life? Tune in for our next episode as we continue to challenge everyone to break average.